Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Damon Ise.
I'm so pleased to be able to stand here and address you folks today. And let me just tell you a little bit about my background. I'm a commercial fisherman from the state of Rhode Island. I also have an extensive aviation background. I was trained at age 18. I have a lot of common links with John Jr. and I was airplane crazy from the day that I grew up. My parents would give me airplanes for Christmas. I took them apart to see what made them work. I bought every I bought every one of those U-control airplanes. You know, when you spin in a circle with them, and they fly around and around. I crashed more planes than you can possibly imagine. And my parents kept asking me, and I'm sorry, at the age of 8 years old, we were fortunate enough to have a summer home on Nantucket. And the gentleman who rented us the house, because we were limited means, Nantucket was cheap in those days. The gentleman who owned the house had a beach bonanza and he owned an automotive dealership. And he would not only, he'd rent us the house for $110 a week. My mother and father would pack everything and he'd fly us over in the bonanza. And in my first trip over there, I barfed all over the airplane. And I was miserable. I got out of the airplane and sometime later that morning, I remember my mother looking at me and saying, you know, what do you want to do later in life? And I said, I want to be a pilot. I want to be a pilot. So they tried to educate me, and I was a rabble-rouser all the way through school. I didn't want to work. I just wanted to play and have fun and go out and do other such things. But all through that period of time, they would keep asking me, come on, you got to apply yourself. You should look at accounting. My father was a phenomenal musician. You could look into music. You could do that. And every time I turn at him and I say, I want to learn to fly. Well, after I bunked school for about 10 years, they finally gave in, and they said, okay, we'll send you to flight school. I was extremely fortunate in that my mentors were an older man by the name of Sabi Ludovici, and every time I mention his name, it's like something sacred to me. And a beautiful, gorgeous, tall Southern blonde who was in her 60s by the name of Frankie Sutton. She had 35,000 hours of instructor time when she took me under her wing. And she had the gentility and the finesse to get me to relax enough that I could actually manipulate the airplane, but I still had the problem with the air sickness and such. The master, Savvy, was another piece of work, but the knowledge that this guy could install in you in 1 hour in an airplane with him was something unbelievable, and he became like a father and a grandfather to me, and he helped me through so many situations. He got me through the air sickness thing by taking me up and doing aerobatics, of all things. And he said, there's only one way we're going to get you out of this air sickness thing. We have to go out and do spins. So now I'm sweating right now, even thinking about it when he said spins, and I go, whoa. We go in the back room, we grab the parachutes, we get in the aerobat, and the key to flying an airplane, and just a couple of tips for you folks. A lot of people have flight fear or your stomach turns in an airplane. The first thing you want to do when you get on an airplane is fill your stomach. Do not fly empty stomached, because that's one trigger for air sickness. The second thing you do, if you feel it coming on, and this is also the case on the water, you look around and establish reference points. Everything in flying is reference points. And the best thing is to use eye stops in many locations. Here, there, 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 there. Move your eyes back and forth, and you'll see that you'll stabilize. One more word of advice. Many of us have friends, they got money, they buy an airplane. Come on, let's go for a ride. You jump in the airplane, and you think, hey, this guy's great. You know, he was the best pilot in the world. Don't trust it. Don't do it, because you don't know the flight standard. And as a flight instructor, I examined more pilots who weren't trained properly. And I'll get onto the subject matter some more, but there's an example here in the PowerPoint display. So without further ado, anyway, I was the second president of Quantity Museum, and I recovered a World War II Navy Hellcat that had gone in 1943 about 15 miles off of Martha's Vineyard. And that's what started my interest in the island to begin with. We wanted the airplane for restoration at the museum, and we thought just innocently we were doing a good thing for the public. We got the National Guard to help us along. We went out there, we recovered this airplane, got it back to the museum, and the next day I get a call from the Naval Investigative Service, and I'm under indictment because supposedly we stole government property. It turned into a battle, and we prevailed in federal court. We won the aircraft. During that time, I made a lot of trips back and forth to the island. I trained many students, and being in the proximity of Providence, that was perfect for their cross-country training, which is going from one point to another. So I was in and out of there quite a bit. I was out fishing the day that John Jr. went in. And when I came home, I was exhausted. I pretty much believed the story that was handed to the public. And about 2 days later, a reporter contacted me and had solicited my opinion because I was known as one of the competent pilots in the area that had high time going in and out of there. And without giving it much thought, I gave him a rather boilerplate answer. And I'll read it to you. It's the excerpt from the paper. And my statement is, you have a tremendous sense of freedom, removal from the world. All your problems just to wash away in the air if you love to fly. Then they speak about a commercial pilot, fisherman, The haze comes in fast. Martha's Vineyard is a beautiful island, and so is Nantucket. But you've got to stay on top of your stuff. I've flown into Martha's Vineyard, and between the time I left Quonset Point and the time I got to the island, I couldn't see the airport until I was directly on top of it. This newspaper sat in my closet until 2014. In 2014, I made my first conference right here in Arlington. I got back home, I was cleaning out my closet, and I came across the article and I read my words, and I said, how irresponsible of me to be given such a boilerplate response, because the first things that we're taught in the sky or on the ocean, and in the sky it's mandatory, you check weather before you leave the ground. And if you're not on record with the FAA for checking weather, you can bet somebody's going to be banging on your door and they'll pull your ticket. There are two things you can't do in flying. You cannot avoid checking weather, and you cannot run out of fuel. If you run out of fuel, you'll never fly again. They'll never let you fly. So I put a bug in my ear. I called a couple pilot friends of mine and I said, Bob, do you remember what it was like that night? Oh, yeah. The fog was so thick, you'd stick your thumb out in front of it and you couldn't see it. I said, Bob, are you absolutely sure? I'm positive. I called another pilot. I asked him the same question. Oh, it's terrible. I still wasn't satisfied. So I started to try to, well, let me back up a bit. Every field has hourly readings that are taken by automated equipment. All these are listed in archives with the FAA. But trying to recover these archives 17 years later was quite a battle. But I found this wonderful search engine that sounds like Wonder Weather or something like that, and my God, I found them. And that's what got me going. And the second I got into this evidence, John Kennedy Jr. never flew into the fog. John Kennedy Jr. never got lost. John Kennedy Jr. went from straightforward flight to straight vertical flight at 5,000 feet a minute. And there are only a few things that can cause that. A terrific author that I read, and I wish I could quote her name because I just can't remember it, but she made a statement and she said, examine the evidence and the story will tell itself. So here we go. Let's examine the evidence. July 19th, 1999, we lost three treasures: Carolyn Bessette, her husband John Kennedy Jr., and Lauren Bessette. Whoop, skip one. There we go. All right, here we go. John's career in aviation started when he saw his first helicopter land at the White House. And he was noted to spin all around the White House and the grounds. He would spin, he'd hold his arms out, and they nicknamed him Helicopter Head for that reason. So his affection for aviation started at a very early age. In February of 1988, without telling Jackie or anyone else for that matter, John secretly enrolled in flying lessons at Martha's Vineyard Airport. Local pilot Arthur Marks was impressed with John, especially his dedication and perseverance. I was impressed with him immediately because he rode his bike to the airport from his mother's house, so he had to be about 16, so he started right at legal age. He rode his bike to the airport from his mother's house at the other end of the island, and it was freezing. Marks also noted that the young Kennedy would rather be flying than working, like all of us. Marks accompanied John on many flights at the control. Marks insisted that he was always focused on the airplane. I never saw him as a pilot act in an impulsive way. In fact, John was probably better than he thought he was. He brought Marks home to meet Jackie, hoping that if she had met his flight instructor, she would tolerate the idea. She acted as if she had no problem with John taking flying lessons. This made John extremely happy, yet soon thereafter, she started having nightmares of John smashing in an airplane. She made such an issue of it that he promised he wouldn't take any more flying lessons. John went on to study, and as we know, took 3 shots at the bar exam, got his law degree, and then he spent time as a prosecutor for several years. On September 12th, People magazine came out, and John became the sexiest man alive. He moved on, and he started his career with George magazine, which was going to be his communication to the media. His mother was rather happy with the idea, but his sister never really quite approved of it. He moved on to interview people like Fidel Castro. He interviewed the mother of the accused assassin of Premier Rabin of Israel, which was also an inside assassination, and this was a very controversial article that he had published in George magazine. So John began making noise at a young age. When asked whether he'd ever enter politics, if your father were a doctor and your uncles are doctors and all your cousins are doctors, all of the family ever talks about is medicine, there's a good chance that maybe you're going to be a doctor too, but maybe you'd rather be a baker. He stole the show in the 1988 Democratic National Convention, and I'm sure most of you are aware of that particular thing. Lots of us saw it, and he was there pitching Teddy Kennedy, but he might as well have been running for the presidency himself. When asked about presidential aspirations, I think I would have to call my Uncle Teddy and gloat for a moment, and then I think I would offer a big tax cut before the next election, and hopefully, in between, try to do some good. And this is when he began to have some political motivation. Stephen Gillen just published a biography on John, and he was a historian and a personal friend of his. In his last month, Gillen says, John was becoming more comfortable with his political ambitions. He wanted to run for the governor of New York, and his ultimate goal was to return to the White House. Gillen describes a moment years earlier when John was watching the 1989 presidential inauguration of George H.W. Bush on television with a close friend. John said he wanted to go home again. Gillen recalls, and by home, he meant the White House. Looking back, he says, I think the year before he died, John planned to be the president of the United States at some point. So we're fairly sure that John had political ambitions and he was going to pursue that line. John had 2 years of intensive consolidated training. He had, and I analyzed all of his flight time, he had at least 200 hours flying hang gliders and ultralights through 1982. He had 46 hours of dual, 1 hour of solo from 82 to 88. Jackie got terrified. John promised her that he would fly no more. And if you heard the news reports and the media reports, they all made it sound like John had this fragmented type of training that was spread out over long periods of time, and he was incompetent, et cetera, et cetera. However, if you look at the following 2 years, John goes out, Jackie dies anyway, and John resumes training in December of '97, and he departs for Flight Services International. He logged 43 hours of dual, 10 hours of solo. He got his private license. He buys a Cessna 182, and he logged 65 hours of dual and 114 hours solo during an 8-month average, 5.5 hours a week. He passes an instrument written exam, which is the toughest thing you would ever be asked to do in your life. And he did it with a 78 percentile. I only scored a 75, and I think the mean is around a 76. He returns to flight service again in April of '99. He gets 13.3 hours of dual instrument flight, 17 hours of simulator instrument flight. This means he can fly in the dark, he can fly in the fog, and he departs flight service again and buys the Saratoga, which was the higher performance airplane that we saw in the initial slide. 3 different CFIs log 96 hours of dual, including 17 hours of night flight and 8 hours of actual instrument time. He received this complex endorsement in May of 1999. Complex simply means the airplane has a retractable landing gear and a controllable propeller. There we go, great. So then we total up the flight hours, and he had 250 hours of dual, 125 hours of solo time, minimal, and I mean minimal. And being an experienced flight instructor, these numbers don't jive to me, because he should rightfully have, I would say, 3 times that amount of solo time. Okay, since his logbooks were destroyed, either by the accident or they were picked up and stolen and sequestered, we don't have that information. But the figures that you see are the ones that I took exactly from the NTSB accident report extract. And they even, when they word it in the extract, they even make it sort of ambiguous again to make it sound like it was all spread out, but it really wasn't. This was a very good, intense training period. This man was a competent pilot. He had 38.3 hours of instrument training at the point that he went in, and you can get an instrument rating with 40 hours of time. So he was very, very close, and I was in actually a very similar situation where I was on a date one night. We flew out to the island, and when it came time to come home, they said everything was clear and beautiful. And this is another rule of aviation: check weather, then don't believe it. So I got about 800 feet up, and then all of a sudden, everything just went black. And I knew damn well that I was in the clouds. And John would have done the same thing. I called approach. I said, I got 40 hours of instrument time. I don't have the rating yet. Can you walk me back to Quonset Point? We made it back without incident, no problems. John was perfectly competent to handle that airplane and get it back there. He had 40 hours of nighttime logged at that time, which is plenty of time for him to fly that airplane competently at night. And he had 96 hours minimal time in the complex aircraft, the Saratoga. There are a lot of reports you will read where they say he had no time in the airplane, he only had a few hours. It's bullshit. It's bullshit. He had the time in the airplane. 450 hours of total estimated pilot time, not including the ultralights. And these are only the hours we know about. Only the hours we know about. It only requires 250 for a commercial certification. Okay, so John was very well experienced, and he knew what he was doing, and he would never take a chance with his wife and his sister-in-law. These are just some shots of the instrument, the automated weather monitoring systems at the airport. This is a laser visibility sensor, and what it does is it takes a laser beam, it shoots it between 2 points, that measures the condensation nuclei in the air, and that will give you a visibility rating. The ceilometer is essentially a laser projector that shoots straight up at the clouds, talks back to the machine, and it tells you where the ceiling is, the cloud level that's over the field. This is the first piece of evidence, the real hard evidence that I came across, and I've interpolated here because this is spread out on about 15 different sheets. And let's just go over this little piece by piece. And if I go walk over here, Rand, can you chase me a little bit, or do I have to stay here? Can I move? Okay, great. So we have the time of day, temperature, dew point, humidity, the dew point humidity spread, visibility, wind direction, wind speed, and the code is the airport, okay? Now I started at New Jersey at Caldwell, where he had departed initially. And what we see is he's 88 degrees, dew point 66, humidity is only 41%, which is fairly dry. The spread is 22, which is very healthy. Wind is southwest at 5.8. To pilots, that's called light and variable. It's not like there was any excessive wind speed. At 8:45, that was Stratton, Sikorsky, down by Bridgeport. We had a temperature of 76 degrees, dew point 69.8, relative humidity a little high, 78%, but that's still flyable. Spread 5.4, 4 miles visibility, west-southwest wind. Wind speed was at 11 knots. At 8:54, and these times are calculated upon all the times where he was actually passing over that airport, okay? So they're recorded as he's traveling. 8:45, we have him at Groton. Temperature is 84, dew point 70. Humidity is back down to 69%. The spread is 11, very healthy. Visibility 7.5 miles, which is very good for the most part. West-southwest wind. Again, winds light and variable. 9 o'clock, he's at New Bedford. So he goes over New Bedford, 77, 69, 79% humidity, 5.9 on the dew point spread. Visibility 7 miles, wind southwest, wind speed light and variable. 9:30, he's at Martha's Vineyard, 74 on the temperature, 65 on the dew point, 73% humidity. Spread is 9 points. Visibility 9 miles, west-southwest wind, 10 knots on the wind. The reason I brought Nantucket in here at 10 o'clock is because Nantucket is 15 miles further out at sea, and that's always the first spot to go down, being further out at sea. The fog always rolls in from the sea. You'll never see it come the other way, not from land onto the island. So even at Nantucket at 10 o'clock, and now he's already in the water, for lack of a better description, he's already in the water 5 minutes later here. Okay, and a half an hour later, we still have 69 degrees, dew point 68. You can see here, the humidity is way up, and the dew point spread is very tight. So Nantucket starts to go down right around 10 o'clock. Okay, but Martha's Vineyard is still terrific when he's actually going in. There's no fog, there's no haze, there's nothing obstructing his visibility. When I saw these figures, I knew something was up. And I said, something does not jive here. Something doesn't jive here. They're not telling us the truth. Initial reports stated, and this came out of CVB in Boston, that the pilot had contacted the tower. What does it say here? Let me just read it. At 9:39 p.m. Friday, Kennedy radioed the airport and said he was 13 miles from the airport and 10 miles from the coast, according to CVB. He reported that he was making his final approach. In his final approach message, CVB said Kennedy told controllers at the airport that he planned to drop off his wife's sister, and then he was going to take off again and head for Hyannis. Now, I've had problems. What happens on the islands is they have control towers that shut down after the aircraft activity of the day slows down, and that time can vary. Usually it's between 9 and 10 o'clock. I don't believe John ever contacted any control tower, and not that he was being irresponsible. It's because he was still too far out. His airplane was found 17 miles from the field, and he was still 7 miles offshore. Okay, and normally you wouldn't contact the tower until you were, I would say, 5 or 6 miles out, and then the tower would clear you for landing. So I don't think that report was accurate in what was actually going on at that time. Adam Budd was an airport attendant at the time. He was working for airport operations, and he was waiting in the lobby for John to arrive. Here's a critical timeline. At 1:30 p.m., John calls Martha's Vineyard Operations, informing them of an anticipated arrival at 7:30. He was I doubt he was looking for tie-down space, since he was going to take off again after dropping off Lauren. There's a lot of talk because John was on the phone a great deal, and there are many articles that claim that he was trying to get a hold of an instructor so this instructor could ride with him. But in reality, what was going on was they were headed to a wedding. Carolyn was still having her nails done at a New York boutique. And there was a gentleman that was sitting in the boutique and actually saw her talking on the phone to John on the other end. So John was calling her every few minutes because he was in a hurry. He was there with Lauren. He wanted to get going, and he was in a hurry in an irresponsible way. He just wanted to get off the ground and get going. He probably just wanted to fly in daylight like any pilot would. And the witness who was sitting there in the beauty parlor turned around and heard her say, well, if you let me get the hell off the phone, I'll get this done and I can get over there. But apparently she was trying to get a nail color that exactly matched the gown that she was wearing. So this took an excessive amount of time for her to get to the airport, and that accounts for the 8:15 late departure from Essex. At 10 o'clock, Adam Budd discovers a couple with a child waiting for John. Now, his estimated time of arrival was between 8:30 and 9. So there's no doubt that John had called this couple and told them, I'm going to be late. I'm going to be late. Because they showed up later. His initial arrival time was going to be 7:30. He called them. He made contact, told them, I'm going to be later. Adam calls the control tower, and he didn't recall this in my conversations with him. And I managed, when you're finding evidence, the best thing that you can possibly get is the evidence of the moment. As soon as something occurs, you jump on that evidence right then. And I was lucky enough, just 2 weeks ago, I found South Coast Today, which is published in New Bedford for July 21st, 1999. And Bud had spoken to them, and he told them he had called the control tower, which was in the process of shutting down for the night, as I had told you, and the tower had no info on the airplane. So I don't believe John ever made that initial tower contact, and he didn't have to. He didn't have to. Once a tower shuts down, we go into uncontrolled status at the field, and that just means all the pilots communicate on one radio frequency. And as you enter the airport pattern, you just call all your positions, you land the airplane, the responsibility is totally yours. Adam then, after being frustrated by the tower, calls Bridgeport Flight Service to see what they might know, and he receives absolutely no cooperation. Adam felt put off by the person he spoke with, but he did not pursue the matter. He's a 21-year-old kid. Adam specifically states that Kennedy Jr. is on board, to no avail. This didn't make any difference to anybody. People didn't start searching for him until 2 o'clock in the morning. 2 o'clock in the morning. This is 5 hours overdue, 5 hours later. At 6:30 a.m., and the Coast Guard was the one who started the search, rightfully, on the insistence of the family members. At 6:30 a.m., the authority for the search and rescue is stripped from their hands in the Coast Guard in an unprecedented mood, and it's handed to the Pentagon. This has never happened in aviation history. This is insane. And then the U.S. Air Force, of all people, become the official search agency in charge of looking for John. And this was not their task. It was not their business. They had no business doing it. In my conversations with Adam, he didn't recall a whole hell of a lot, but we got a few pieces out of him. He said the visibility was good, because he was on the ground. The visibility was good. There was a very thin fog directly on the ground, not more than 4 inches deep. Okay, so there was nothing at altitude. And this was just a result of the fact that the ground was cool. We got some warm, moist air that just came over the ocean, and you've seen this many times. And that fog of haze that just hovered right over the grassy area. So that was the condition. He said he looked straight up and he could see the stars above. He could see the entire periphery of the airport, and that was visible to the eye. I was trying to catch an aircraft movement after the time that he was due, because that would have proven that other pilots were flying in on VFR conditions. Okay, but he didn't recall any movements after 9:30 or 10. He closed up shop. He went partying with friends. He came in for his morning shift, and the island was already buzzing with the press. He spoke innocently, honestly, with members of the press prior to a hush order. He was fired that week for violating that hush order. He received a thank you phone call from Ted Kennedy for trying to execute a search effort. He left the island. He returned to Bridgewater, where his family was, and unfortunately his father died on August 10th. And Adam Budd never gave the crash a second thought, and still essentially buys the official story. And in my conversations with him, he was very difficult to interview, because he was a high-energy guy, and every time I went to ask him a question, he'd run me right over. I could never finish the statement I was trying to get down, and he'd give me these opinions. Now, this guy, the way I found him, I didn't know how old he was. There are 15 million Adam Budds in the country. You think it's kind of it's an odd name, but it isn't. And I didn't have a clue. I didn't have a clue as to how to tag him. And in that article that we just saw previously, the one that was published in the New Bedford, they stated he was 21 years old, and that was the key. That was what I needed. I got onto a search engine that you go on, you're checking out people's backgrounds and such. Added up, I found the 41-year-old Adam Budd, and here I got an extensive aviation background. The guy's worth $900,000. He'd worked for 5 or 6 major airlines. He is a licensed pilot, but he didn't work in that respect. And he keeps telling me on the phone, he says, nah, he was fighting with his old lady in the back seat. He never wanted to go. He kicked the stick. The airplane went uncontrolled, and it went in. Come on, you got to be kidding. I said, well, Adam, I got evidence that says that that's probably not what happened. Every time I tried to tell him, he was stonewalling me, so I didn't really try to go much further with him. Now, his exact quotes, anyway, to air traffic control. Actually, Kennedy Jr. is on board. They want to know where he is. And he generally performed clerical tasks like landing fees, assisting travelers. When the operator told him he wouldn't give him the information on the phone, Bud backed off. And he said, okay, well, if it's too much trouble, I'll just have him wait. It's not a big deal. In the end, it probably wouldn't have helped anything by the description of the wreckage Bud said of his telephone call to the FAA. It doesn't seem like it would have mattered. Then he says, it sounds like they're going to fire me, but I'll find out. The operations manager, when he was interviewed at Vineyard Airport, refused to discuss him. Okay, and what he told me was, he said, the goons came down on everybody right there, and they said, you don't breathe a word of this to anybody. So someone put the squash on what actually happened. So when Adam does this, the Federal Aviation Administration starts to backpedal. Okay, now at this point, would any of you be concerned? Okay, the guy's an hour overdue. Are you concerned? I would be concerned, okay? I would be concerned. Several aviation experts, ambiguous. Who were the aviation experts? And the FAA said the agency acted appropriately. I don't agree. An FAA spokesman who said the agency does not provide any information on private citizens and private aircraft over the telephone, and that the call from Bud gave no indication of any serious problem. He's telling them the family members are standing here, he's overdue, by an hour and a half, and they have no problem. They have no problem. We wish very much that we had more information, but we had nothing to indicate that the plane was overdue or that it was in trouble. Now the AOP, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, they chime in. And they get a guy from MIT, some doctor, aeronautics doctor from MIT, to come in and get in with this. And the initial statement, there's nothing really fishy with that. The plane that landed intact could typically, and it wouldn't be landed, a plane that would have ditched intact would probably have floated 15 minutes or so. A plane that breaks apart is going to go sink like a lead balloon. The first question is, was it a survivable crash? If it was survivable, would it have potentially made a difference? But it doesn't appear that the FAA really did anything inappropriate. This next one is the one that really gets me. In 99% of the cases when someone is reported overdue, they're safe on the ground somewhere and just not where people expected them to be. I have never known that to be a case, okay? When you're 15 minutes, 20 minutes overdue, someone is going to give you a call and start looking for you. So this is completely untrue. I'm going to have to start moving pretty quickly. I got the sign here that I got 10 minutes left. But I'm coming back at noontime. We're going to run for an hour and a half for what I can't finish right now, and I can tell you it'll be worth every second. Okay, these are all the initial media reports about Kennedy's route of flight. Okay, and they're taking him out of Essex, New Jersey. They're taking him over to Long Island, showing a big, long 80-mile stretch over open water where he makes a shot for Martha's Vineyard. No pilot in his right mind would do this at night, okay, because you always want to leave yourself out in case of an engine, leave yourself an out if you have an engine loss. The proper procedure would be to follow the Connecticut coastline all the way. You have Route 95 there as an alternate runway in the case that you have a failure, okay? Now, look at these, one right after another. This is going to drive you crazy when you see this. And who was this one? This was Associated Press. Here's the next one. Now they've got him even going out. He's taken off near the Hamptons here, going over open. He's turning out over open ocean and then drawing an arc and coming back to Martha's Vineyard. This is insane. One more example. And this brings him right over Cape Poag on Montauk Point, over and over again. The initial reports from the Coast Guard said an ELT, emergency locator transmitter, was detected in the water near Martha's Vineyard. Now, I dispute this location as being inaccurate. However, an ELT is like a tin can device with an antenna on it. It's shock mounted inside the airplane, and it's designed to blow free in the event of excess G-force being impact. Okay, and when it goes free, it transmits a signal. However, that signal is not directional. You have to go and hunt for it and find where it is. So I suspect that this was just an estimated location, but one way or another, the ELT had gone off in the airplane and someone had heard it. And then probably the Coast Guard. And this is no big secret. If you have an aerial or a maritime radio that's tuned into that frequency, you're going to hear this warble. And essentially, the way they find an ELT is to fly back and forth until the warble is the loudest and the clearest, and then they throw a duck and follow the duck straight down. And that's where you're going to find your wreckage. Another deliberate lie. Diagram presented by the Associated Press. John's airplane is shown to have made final contact with the FAA directly over Montauk Point, Long Island. We already know through the initial reports that his last call was made to the control tower at a position probably 13 miles southwest of the Vineyard, but now we dispute that fact because we know the tower was closed. And obviously his route of flight is grossly misrepresented in these pictures. They got the search area here. This is pretty close to where he was. It's probably more like somewhere. Can you see that? No. He was more like somewhere in here. I'm sorry. He was more like somewhere in here. So this is just, that's an estimate. Again, Associated Press. Now, I got into the NTSB report, and I charted out his course according to what they reported here. This is Hortonport, Long Island, where they initiated the search. This is John Kennedy's actual route of flight, which is the rule of thumb in the New York area. And I've flown this hundreds of times, back and forth to Teterboro. The reason for this, two reasons. What you see in here was called the New York Terminal Control Area. Okay, I mean, all the heavy aircraft come in and out of here. When pilots go out of here on visual flight rules, they try to get them out of this area as quick as they can to an area where they don't have traffic that's that intensive. So what John did, he took off from F6, and this is precisely what we would do. Took off from Essex, you get to the Hudson River, you head north to Tappan Zee Bridge, make a right turn. This is just like driving a car. Make a right turn. He heads out, he chases the whole coastline all the way up, keeping Route 95 out to his left. He comes all the way up to my hometown there in Rhode Island, Narragansett Bay, and I'm not sure that my last leg is exactly representative of that. You know, that angle could be a little different. And I got 5 minutes, and he went in. And this is how can they put all this stuff up when this is precisely where he went? This is what the government says. This is the NTSB report. This is the Bible. That's what he did. That's what he did. And he acted responsibly, and he acted as any pilot would that had half a snuff about him. So we'll go back to the Pentagon takes over. Pentagon takes over, and they talked to Lieutenant Colonel Steve Rourke, and they said, why did you guys execute a search out over Hortonport on Long Island, stay there for 5 hours when you knew you had an ELT out near New Bedford and Nantucket? And his response is, well, that was only one possible position. Well, one reporter from People magazine, this Linda Killian, got pissed. And she called this guy, put him on television, started questioning him, and he hung the phone up. Static. He disappears. And I tried searching him out. There's no Colonel Rourke. I don't know who. You'd think you'd be able to find him on a sophisticated search engine, and he's evaporated. They claim he went in a graveyard spiral. Graveyard spiral is a situation where a pilot becomes disoriented because he can't see the horizon. When an airplane first begins to bank, you can't feel that. You can't feel that bank. And what'll happen is, if you're not paying attention, that bank will increase and increase, and then you're either going to go nose high and nose low, and then you get into a position where you're out of control and you go into the sea. That's not at all what happened here to John. Not at all. I wanted you to see this before the 5 minutes was up. This is his actual flight profile. Okay, he was cruising at 5,000 feet. He began a perfect descent to the vineyard, and all of a sudden, at 2,300 feet, well, I'm sorry, not 2,300. He goes to 2,300, and then in here, he just makes a couple of little minor corrections. Maybe he just went a little lower than he wanted to, and he came back up, and this is perfectly normal. And then all of a sudden, this happens. Straight down. He went from this, in 2 seconds, he went from this to, not this, this, and straight into the water. Okay? There is only one thing that will cause that kind of effect, and that's a dismemberment of the tail section. Dismemberment of the tail section. I'm going to stop right there. Done. All right? We'll pick this up back at noontime. If you want to shoot a question or two, go ahead. But just one or two. Yes, Ed.
30 seconds. This is not my forte or anything, but he did say a couple of things that grabbed my attention. Number one, on the list of suspicious things pertaining to this, in the magazine George, it always bothered me. There was an article in one of the issues, in which it talked about the 10 worst presidents in history. I think Nixon was at the top. Johnson's not in the 10. And it's as if we're not going there yet, okay? Because there's no way you leave out Lyndon Johnson unless you have a hidden agenda, number one. and I bet you don't know this. And I didn't know it until you said it. And I went, uh-oh. He said that Stephen Guillaume wrote the biography. Guillaume wrote basically a lone nut assassin book. Oswald did it alone. And he is one of the chief historian, quote-unquote, executives at the History Channel. And if you didn't buy one of the original 7, 8, and 9s, and you got one off the television and that, once the crap hit the fan, they added an introductory statement. And Stephen Guillaume comes on and says, this is just another theory of many theories we looked at. He, in my opinion, is one of them. And if he becomes John Kennedy's friend, that's not good news, in my opinion. Just thought I'd throw that out. I knew I'd blow his mind.
Hi, is there a way to get your slides, number one, about the investigation? Did they consider that it was a moonless night? I haven't really heard.
The moon was something I never checked, honestly, Bob.
Does it make a difference?
I thought about it the other night. I said, I wonder if there was a moon or not.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you have a full moon, you're going to have a little more visibility. But the tower was on record as talking. In fact, it was the tower manager was on record as talking to, and he states this, airplanes at least 10 or 15 miles out, and he could see their lights. He could see their lights.
Damon, thank you for your presentation. I was a flight student in the Navy, and I understand a lot of what you're saying. What justification was there for the military and the CIA to have anything to do with this investigation?
Yeah, I don't know anything about the CIA, but taking it to the Pentagon it's just never done. This is unbelievable. The authority was taken from the original, from the rightful authority. It was taken from and this rape, and I can't use a better word, this same rape was used in the crash of TWA Flight 800, okay, where they took all the authority away from the NTSB. The NTSB, under the Bush administration, they put in political cronies at the very top, and they took out people that had 50 and 60 years of experience in aviation, okay? Now, I've got this straight from the lead investigator of TWA Flight 800. His name is Hank Hughes, and anybody who wants to check on what I'm saying, okay? And I've had phone conversations with this man. He's very cooperative. All of those chief investigators came up with a 10,000 signature petition to reinvestigate that accident, okay? And Congress denied it. They buried it.
So when you bring up TWA Flight 800, even I, founding member of the Tinfoil Hat Society, go, ooh, how do you react to people that say, do you wear a tinfoil hat? The only thing I can do is say, conspiracy theorist is a lie detector. What do you do? Because,
conspiracy theorist is a phrase that was invented by the CIA.
Right. So how do you respond?
They were so itchy over TWA Flight 800 that they published their own piece of propaganda that was called, "It Was Not a Missile." Right. It was not a missile. 700 witnesses on the ground saw 2 missiles come up and hit that airplane. Yeah. Qualified pilots saw 2 missiles come up and hit the airplane. There was an Air Italia airliner that went out just before TWA Flight 800. They saw the whole thing and they said, God bless that poor guy. And they saw the missiles come up.
Thank you.
FBI agents, they intimidated. There was a lady from Italy who was trying to get her immigration papers in here. And she kept arguing with them. She says, I know what a rocket looks like. She said, I saw 2 rockets come up from the ground. They headed towards the airplane. The FBI grabbed her. They put her in the back room. And they said, you're trying to immigrate to the United States, right? She said, yeah. He said, well, it'd be very wise if you didn't tell anybody what you saw. They rearranged the evidence. They mistagged the evidence. They falsified the fact that they had found explosive residue all over the wing spar of the airplane. And now you have to think about this. This is an airplane. It's full of people. It's jammed full of fuel. Okay, there's no airspace in those fuel tanks. And you're flying on kerosene. Kerosene. You could throw a match into kerosene and it goes out. That explosion was triggered by a proximity missile. The missile didn't hit the plane. It came up to within 10 feet of the plane, and then it let go. And it was the concussion that blew the airplane apart. Yes, sir.
Yes, I have a question. I have a FAA pilot's license, just single engine land, not many hours, maybe 300. I have a FAA pilot's license, but I'm not that experienced with this. But if the tail section's the problem when the plane is nosediving, I would automatically pull up on the steering wheel. And since John's an experienced glider pilot, I would try to pull up on the steering wheel and then flare out the plane and try to land on the water, and you can see the horizon with the lights on the ground. So that's my first reaction.
Yeah, well, no, without a tail section, you can pull on that stick all you want.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And not only that, okay, he never got out a mayday call. He never got out any kind of a mayday call indicating he was in trouble. Nothing like that, okay? So what happened was something catastrophic happened inside that aircraft that pulverized the occupants.
Oh, okay.
First.
Thank you.
And then that. Okay, now, let me explain about, just before I get to you, sir. This is called positive dynamic stability. Got it. And airplanes, when they go for certification, when they come out of factories, they obviously they have to go through flight tests. Okay, positive dynamic stability means, and this is how an airplane naturally flies. This has nothing to do with autopilot. Okay, this is how an airplane naturally flies. You have a power setting, you trim it to an attitude, and the airplane will continue on that attitude for as long as it's undisturbed. You reduce a little power, you'll have a controlled descent. You increase a little power, it'll climb a little bit. If you disturb that flight path vertically, not so much horizontally, but if you disturb that vertical flight path, let's say the airplane takes one oscillation. I love using my hands because it's an excellent tool. You'll have let's say we pull the nose up. We pull the nose up, the airplane slows down, the nose will come back down, pick up more airspeed, and as the lift factor increases, the nose comes back up again in sequential reduced oscillations, okay, until it comes right back to level flight. Neutral dynamic stability means that once you disturb the airplane, it makes an oscillation and then it continues that oscillation. Negative dynamic stability, you disturb the flight path of the airplane and then the oscillations go wild, and you see a lot of that in the military fighters that are fly-by-wire stuff. I can see video after video where they test flying these airplanes. You see them then get down in proximity of the ground, and the tails are flapping like this because, you know, they're rigged and they have negative dynamic stability. An airplane will not be certified unless it has positive dynamic stability. So naturally, I've had people that talk about Manchurian flight instructor. We'll get onto that later. But you shove the stick forward, the stick comes right back. Anyone else? You, sir? Microphone.
It's my understanding that the fuel selector switch was in the closed position, which is hard to do. They make it deliberately difficult to close that valve so it does not happen.
Okay, he's talking about the fuel valve.
My question is, who or what was on Flight 800 of importance that day, or was that simply an accident?
Well,
in a
I don't want to
Navy
get into
missile
800.
test?
We'll do 800 later. There's still plenty on. One thing I want to say about TWA Flight 800, after they pulled the scam that they did with TWA Flight 800, and this was straight out of the White House, okay? And Kellstrom was the goon. He was the chief. He was the FBI district chief for New York City, and he was the one that was seen repeatedly on television telling everybody it wasn't a missile, okay? After they pulled that facade, John Kennedy Jr. was a drop in the bucket. It was nothing to erase John. It was easy. It was easy. One. Go ahead.
Well, the stuff that I read on the news or whatever, or heard on the news, didn't he break his ankle, and didn't he have his cast just removed, and wasn't he still on crutches when he got on that airplane?
That would have no effect on his ability to control the aircraft.
Okay.
Rudder pressure is very light. It's not like, he wouldn't be in any great deal of pain doing that. Thanks very much. We'll see you later.
All right, once again, Damon Ise.
First thing we'll address. Okay, rather than going back to the 2 years of intensive focus training, I think I made that point pretty well. So let's address what he really had in as far as flight time and pilot qualifications. And as I told you, I've got 15 to 1,700 hours of flight instruction. I know what I'm talking about. John Kennedy Jr. had 250 hours total time of dual. He had a minimum of 125 hours of solo time, and we know that this is a ridiculously low figure. The ratio of solo time to dual time here does not make a lot of sense. This is all that we have on record. But normally, someone with about 250 hours of dual would have in excess of 400 hours of solo time. Okay, no flight school in the world would allow you to have an excessive amount of dual training as compared to the solo time. It's very, very important that that stays proportionalized. Boy, that's better. John had 38.3 hours minimal time in instrument flight training. So he wasn't qualified to fly instrument. He did not have an instrument rating, but he was this far away. He was at the end of his training. And certainly, if he had gotten into adverse conditions, if he had gotten into trouble, he could have made one radio call and navigated that aircraft clearly, without a problem. He had 40 hours of nighttime, which more than qualified him to fly in the conditions that he was. And he had 96 hours minimal time in complex aircraft, which is very good. The normal transition to get into complex aircraft, okay, the aircraft that he had before, and we heard this over and over again. He said he got into this new high-performance airplane, and it had sophisticated nav equipment that got ahead of him. Okay, it's baloney. It had the same nav equipment that every other airplane that he trained in. He may have had something elaborate at the time, like a GPS, and you know how simple that is, all right? We all have them in our cars. It's the same damn thing in an airplane. An airplane autopilot is not a complex organism. It's a single-axis autopilot, which means all it does is change your heading a little bit. It brings you to a point. If the plane goes off track, the autopilot will compensate, re-intercept your path, and then, remember I told you about positive dynamic stability? It does the same thing with the autopilot. It'll come back and forth across that center line until it finally homes and finds that route home. So he was more than competent, more than trained, far more trained than the conditions warranted, okay? He did not get into a situation that got ahead of him. And we can prove that with the weather conditions, and we'll throw that slide back up again just to review that, okay? So what we have on record is he's got 450 hours of total estimated time, not including the ultralight time that could be hundreds of hours that we know about. Only 250 hours are required for commercial certification. And I'm sorry if I'm boring you with this, but you know, I really need to prove this point, and had the gentleman been here earlier and seen the presentation, he wouldn't have made the statements that he did. And I'd have been happy to debate him on these. I'm sorry I lost it. Let's go back to that. Yeah, this is the one. No, here it is. Yeah, this is it. This is it. You don't mind if I shed my jacket, do you?
Is that first time up there correct, or should it be 8:35 instead of 53?
No, that's the correct time, because that's the time that the automated system at the field recorded what was going on there, okay? So that's a half an hour after he left. That's a half an hour after he left Caldwell, which was the airport that boasted the worst conditions, okay? As he proceeded easterly, the conditions got better and better and better. But I know I did, but I've got to go back and prove why I came in here and ripped the guy's head off. Sometimes I'm a bad boy, you know. My mother was a school teacher. She told me that. So, temperature was 88. Dew point was 66. Humidity, relative humidity, 41%. Now, if you have 41% humidity in your house, you're fairly dry. That will dry the saliva on your tongue. Okay, so we were nowhere near the saturation point. As dew point and temperature close together to the same number, like, have we got an example here? No, not really. So the closer these two numbers come together, the closer we are to having perfectly saturated air. Perfectly saturated air, 100% saturation. You know what, his visibility at Caldwell, he had 5 miles, which was adequate and legal for what he was doing, okay? And 1 mile visibility is what's required to fly in visible flight range. So he had, just leaving Caldwell, he had 5 times the visibility that he needed to take off, okay? So that's Caldwell. Then we got temperature and dew point, and they're coming a little closer together here, see it? So we've gone from a spread to 22 to 5.4, and I would say at this point, there was probably some haze that was accumulating, because we're getting closer to that saturation point. See, we went from relative humidity of 41% to 78%. The visibility corresponds with those figures by dropping a mile. Wind was west-southwest, once again light and variable, and this was at down at Sikorsky at Bridgeport. At 8:54, at Kagon, that's Groton. 8:54, he was about passing over Groton. The reading there was temperature 84, dew point 70, 69%, so now he's back in better conditions. I'm sorry, the spread is 11 points, better condition. Less relative humidity by 10 points is the figure above. All right, so now the air is clearer than it was from where it came from. Visibility 7.5 miles, wind direction west-southwest, wind speed 5.8. At 9 o'clock in New Bedford, which was very close to his destination, temperature was 77, dew point 69.1, humidity is back up again, 79%, the spread 5.9, but the visibility is still listed as 7.0, 7 miles, plenty of visibility. Wind is southwest again, light and variable. Martha's Vineyard at 9:30, which is about the time that he went in. Temperature is 74, dew point 65, 73% relative humidity, 9 miles visibility. Now this is what's reported by the automated system. However, the tower manager is God at an airport. The tower manager is on record in the NTSB report as stating that the visibility reading at Martha's Vineyard, and he's trying to be conservative here so that he can support the story, the visibility was slightly better than what the accident report reported, okay? And he stated that he was talking to airplanes that were 10 or 15 miles out, he could see their lights, and that was the situation. That was the situation. That Martha's Vineyard had no obscurity whatsoever. And once again, I took the reading at Nantucket at 10 o'clock because that island is another 17 miles out to sea, and that island, were a fog to come in from the ocean or the relative humidity were going to rise, it would be from an ocean source, especially with the west-southwest wind. And even west-southwest doesn't pump that kind of moisture up. So even at Nantucket, we had 69, 68. Humidity is high, and now, see, we're close. We only have a 1-point spread. So Nantucket was starting to go down at 10 o'clock. But we already know that John had entered the water a half an hour ahead of that, and that was 17 miles that way, when the visibility here was 9 miles. And in my experience flying, I've seen this, over and over again. It only takes a few minutes for a field to go from total VFR, visual flight rules, to IFR, instrument flight rules. But in this scenario, he took off from Caldwell with the worst weather. He landed at Martha's Vineyard with the best weather. And that's just clearly the case. He was qualified in the airplane. He had more than adequate time as far as pilot competency. And I can't subscribe to the theory that John was irresponsible, John wandered off course, John went into the death spiral. It is not, a death spiral does not take you from straightforward flight to straight vertical flight in a matter of seconds. And to repeat once again, there is only one thing, there's only one thing that would put an airplane in that configuration, and that's dismemberment of the tail section. Okay, and even if he lost control of the tail section, let's say the tail section's still on, okay, but he lost the elevator cables. He lost the rudder cables. The rudder and the elevator would still stay in that position and hold the aircraft in straight and forward level flight. In fact, I'm glad I thought of this one. In training in flight school, we were taught, in fact it was mandatory, and they don't do this everywhere. It was mandatory that we take our students and we fly the airplane around the pattern, only touching the throttle and the trim tab, okay? All of these movies where you see pilots doing this are total fallacies, total fallacies. This is how you fly a plane. Thumb and forefinger is all the pressure you need. That's it, very gentle. You assume an attitude, you trim it to that attitude, the airplane stays there and keeps on going. You can fall asleep for 5 minutes and you'll wake up and you'll be straight and level and going right on course. The airplane doesn't deviate, it doesn't do any wild gyrations, it's nothing like that. And this is why when Adam Budd, since all of you here were earlier, whenever he said to me he's having a fight with Carolyn in the back seat, she didn't want to go anyway, and he kicked the stick or something and the plane goes over into a dive. I said to myself, you get this aviation history behind you? You're a private pilot, and this is the explanation you're giving me as to why the airplane went in? He gives it a little accent, because first you kick the stick, it's just going to bounce back. The airplane's just going to keep going straight forward. Nothing's going to happen. You could not apply enough pressure to that yoke to keep that airplane going straight down like that. And any suggestion that John was suicidal and he wanted to say that, just throw it out the window. That's crazy. It's nothing like that. So from that standpoint, I think we've proven, A, the conditions were VFR, he was legal to be there, he was safe to be there, the flight was completely normal until this catastrophic incident, okay? Were he having troubles, if he had gotten disoriented, he would have picked up that radio, he would have called for help. He never had that time. He never had that time. Something happened in that airplane that knocked those occupants silly. And they were either unconscious or unable to respond. And by the time anything could happen, it was over. It was over. If you're in a spin, you lose 500 feet per second, about 500 feet per second. And you're going down and corkscrewing. There's no evidence that the airplane was in a stall or was corkscrewing. This was a streamline. It was a straight shot, straight in. And it wasn't perfectly vertical, it was actually negative to vertical. So he had negative 10 degrees as he went into the water. There was no recovering this airplane. There was no way to do it. And as we move on, you'll see further evidence to this effect. Okay, we did Adam Budd. We went all the way to the vertical, right? Yep. All the misnomers in his flight route. We got that straight. We know where he was flying. We know he was doing it safely. And the flight was completely normal until he got to this point.
You ever talked to Jack Cashel?
No. No, if you don't mind, just let me run through this and then we'll chat afterwards. Let me put everything before you.
I've seen him. Just a minute. Go ahead.
All right. We talked about this too with Colonel Rourke and the angry reporter that let him have it. Graveyard spiral, we touched base on that. And I believe that's the slide we left off on, okay, with that straight vertical going, screaming down. Also, there's been talk about the Manchurian flight instructor. There's a lot of talk about the fuel selector valve, which was found in the off position. Were you the gentleman that brought that up? Yeah. The fuel selector valve being in the off position when the inspectors were examining the wreckage. First of all, the NTSB report states, that the airplane went in under full power. The engine indicators within the cockpit told them that, and also the shape of the propeller will tell them that. And let me back up on this. I've done a lot of recoveries of World War II airplanes that had mid-air collisions, went on training and other such things. There were more than, at Quonset Point, there were more than 365 aircraft wrecks just in training. We lost more pilots here in training than we actually lost overseas when they got there, if you can believe this. Okay? And when these airplanes go in under full power like that, the propellers have a torque curl to them. There's a definite arc in the propeller blades. Okay? And had that propeller been either at an idle or a dead position, the propeller would have just been bent back. You wouldn't have the torque and the curve. And I apologize for this, but I was looking at, there were two 20th anniversary issues that came out that I had been looking at my house. One was from People magazine, and the other one was Star, which, you know, some of us say it's bullshit, but other times they're good with their stuff. And I finally found a picture of his prop. And his prop absolutely displays the high torque entry into the ocean. Okay, so he had full power or at least cruising power when the airplane went in. Now, and you have to think also when he assumed the vertical attitude, that propeller is going to turn faster and faster as he's headed straight down, just because of the wind effect on the airfoils. But you see it in all the World War II wrecks. You'll see that telltale curve. They curve in the direction of rotation. There's that bend. There's that bend on all of them. Once they recovered the wreckage was brought to Otis Air Force Base for reassembly. This is what they do, and they go out, they recover all the pieces of the aircraft, they rent a gymnasium or a hangar somewhere else, and the NTSB examiners will go in and they literally just take all the parts and they lay the whole airplane out for what's left of it. I've never seen a barricade in my time, and at Quonset Air Museum, we had several crashes that had been brought into our facility by the salvage agencies. We had one particular aircraft that was flying back and forth from Block Island. It went down with 8 people in it. The pilot had a heart attack, and the airplane went in. They stretched everything out on the floor, no barrier. I was present for the recovery of the stuff that came back from the Egypt Air crash, where they state the pilot shut off the fuel and everybody went in. It was all smashed up. Same protocol. They laid out that way, no barricade. But for some reason, they didn't want anyone seeing this particular wreckage, and this is what they did. So they barricaded it off. And I don't want to speculate why, but this is what they did. It wasn't there very long. Normally these things take quite some time, and I think that airplane was junked like somewhere in the vicinity of 2 to 3 weeks. And what they did, they took the wreckage and they went and they brought it to a scrapyard. All right, so elimination of evidence. Here's our death certificate, and unfortunately, our prince died of multiple traumatic injuries, as did his passengers. He was found in the front seat. He was slumped over the stick. All 3 passengers were pinned in debris. The ladies were laying down in the back seats. And the divers, and these guys are really experienced in forensic diving, and they said this was just a real horror show for them, especially when they saw the occupants' faces. And he said, you know, they were still intact, and it was a real eerie thing for them. It was very hard for them to do. There's also a missing front passenger seat that has led to a lot of speculation about the Manchurian flight instructor that was in that seat. And the insinuation is that they picked up the flight instructor and the seat when they were doing their cleanup job and got rid of him. But you'd have to think each other, first of all, John did not need an instructor to make the trip. One instructor claims to have offered to make the trip with him. John refused. You know, he checked weather ahead of time. He knew he didn't need it. He refused the help. He didn't need to. He didn't need the flight instructor. And he was bringing the airplane permanently there for the weekend. And the conditions were perfectly fine. Initially, I presented this slide last year, and unfortunately, I didn't really pay attention to the date in the upper right corner. So I'll be the first guy to come and tell you that I made a mistake. Because this is a radar depiction of the night before. I believe that's 7/18, if you see it on the upper right. So this is the day before he went in, which were similar weather conditions. And in this situation, you can see where all the precipitation is back towards the Hudson. And Martha's Vineyard, which is way out here in the circle, is perfectly in the clear. However, this does not represent what was going on the following night, the night that he was killed. So I'm retracting this as a piece of evidence, but this gives you an idea of what goes on. I think we'll discuss Mr. Skolnick last, but, well, no, let me give you something on Sherman Skolnick. He's the gentleman in the middle with the, with the wild hair. And Sherman Skolnick was a researcher, a brilliant man, and he had contracted polio as a child, and he was bound to a wheelchair. The guy must have had some kind of money because he dedicated his life to taking out crooked politicians and operators. And he's got something like 600 heads to his record. He was a real smart character. Sherman Skolnick managed to abscond the secret FBI report that is never mentioned anywhere in any document, okay? And you can't imagine John Kennedy Jr. going in an airplane and then not having the FBI there. There's no mention of these guys anywhere. They're spooks. So, this one's the hammer. This is the secret FBI report and the results by Sherman Skolnick. And if you read the wordage here, it looks extremely authentic. I can't say for absolutely sure it is, but the way it's worded, it's right there. Excuse me, I gotta tuck my shirt in here. So I'll read these out for you, item by item. And every time I read this, I feel sicker and sicker. First of all, no declassification of this report until 7/22/2029. 2029. I may not even be here when they finally release the results of this and make it And you know what they did with all the Kennedy records. It was the same deal. This is in deference to the wishes of a senior member of the Kennedy family. Bullshit. Bullshit. I don't believe it. Also in deference to the order of the national government and in respect to certain foreign intelligence agencies having reciprocal agreements with the U.S. I see this as blubber. Now, number 4. President of the United States, order and national security findings attached. Okay, so this order came straight from the White House. The recovered aircraft shows evidence of an explosive device having been glued or affixed within the tail luggage compartment. Device was apparently actuated by a barometric trigger, radio signals not ruled out. I couldn't make this up. Study of the radar shows the plane fell in excess of 6,000 feet per minute up to radar cutoff. Okay, our standard rate of descent when we're transitioning from altitude to landing is 500 feet per minute. Okay, John Kennedy and his family went in at 10 times that rate. 10 times. And we've already discussed, you can't push the control stick forward, even if you wanted to commit suicide. You're not going to push it forward and be able to hold it there as that airplane picks up speed. It's going to fight you and come all the way back. He would have to have stuck his feet up, both feet up there, and pinned himself against the seat. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. Tail structure dismembered. Recovery of a piece of luggage from beyond the flight path of the aircraft correlates with it being hurtled out of the tail luggage compartment at outburst. Preliminary examination of the aircraft shows residue of an explosive device the laboratory identifies as being the type used by certain foreign intelligence agencies. Refer to President of the United States order and findings. Study of air traffic control and other radio signals shows no Mayday report from the aircraft explained by rapidity of descent. And this is all the stuff I've been telling you right along. And I researched all this out. I knew this before I found this document. Investigation and examination has been strictly compartmentalized, and we know what that means, right? That's a need-to-know basis. And this is what they do when some covert operation is taking place. In short, perfunctory examination of the recovered bodies was completed. Examination revealed that Carolyn Bessette Kennedy was in her 3rd trimester pregnant, the fetus a boy. 4 bodies were transferred to a senior member of the Kennedy family. The Bureau was not informed whether the bodies were actually cremated. Indirect advisories report that the bodies may have been shipped in untagged containers to foreign destinations. Reliable assets are to submit reports. So what that line means is the FBI sort of lost track of the bodies at the very end, and they're not really sure what happened. The unborn child. Which was a boy, by the way. Gemstone files. We'll come back to this in discussion, I think, because this is pretty involved. This is something, I've got to give it two little tidbits here that just kind of came across my desk. A very trusted associate of mine sent me this extremely interesting, because we're getting to the part of the story now where we're getting to the whodunit. And that's something I'd rather discuss rather than try to render an opinion on. But this is an FBI document. Let's see if I can move that a bit. No, we're stuck with it. FBI document that was sent to me from a very close associate, and he says, use this in your speech. I found this, and he said, I can't follow up and see what the rest of this is about. However, this is a complaint filed by Joe Biden, September 8th, 1994. Apparently, down there in the highlight, and just above it, there was an envelope postmarked Worcester, Mass., bearing the hand-printed address, Senator Joseph Biden, Democrat, Delaware. Accompanying the handwritten printed letter dated 8/24/94, beginning, "Dear Senator Biden, you're a traitor," and bearing the signature, John F. Kennedy, Jr. Okay, so it's just something for all of us to think about. I'm not taking a political stance. I'm not trying to shed anybody's political beliefs, but when something like this that looks extremely legitimate comes across your path, you have to ask questions. You have to ask questions. There's something there. Another extremely important point. How many of you here have read The Inheritance by Chris Fulton? Yeah, not many. I would advise each and every one of you to pick up a copy of that, because that book will shake your britches. You won't be able to put it down. That book is essentially about the Cartier watch that John Kennedy was wearing the day that he was assassinated. That Cartier watch still contained the DNA of our president, and it also had mercury contamination, which came from a frangible bullet. Okay, the frangible bullet takes the single bullet theory and throws it out the window. I was fishing in the middle of the summer, and between tows, we set the net down, we tow it for a while, and then I got an hour and a half to fool around. I'm standing there twiddling my thumbs. So I'm just flipping back and forth on the internet, and all of a sudden I see Fox Business News, JFK Jr.'s net worth, and it's an article worth reading if you want to punch it up when you leave here. And they're talking about who inherited what once John died. His net worth at the time was somewhere between 150 and 200 million, and he had he had stocks, other such assets. Just about everything went to Caroline's children, his sister's children, the Schlossbergs. But in the very last paragraph, and this is really significant, in the very last paragraph, among other things that they reportedly received from their uncles, clothing, furniture, and mementos from their grandfather, former President John F. Kennedy, including a rocking chair, PT 109 tie clip, gold Cartier watch. He had that evidence in his possession. Okay, and that evidence was lifted off his body, and the government searched for this for years and years and years. And this is why Chris Fulton went through the hell he did in prison, was because he had this particular piece of evidence, and he got it back to John Kennedy Jr. John Kennedy Jr. was acquiring a great deal of evidence against the people that he believed were involved in killing his father. And I would dare say he was being watched from the day he started George magazine, and there were probably moles in the machine. And whenever Eddie came up and talked and said Gillen was a mole, here's your prime target. This guy became John's friend, and he's a bad guy. He's a bad guy. So people were watching him. John published seething articles about the Mossad and the fact that they had taken out their own prime minister, Rabin. They took some lady's son, who was another Sirhan, made him the scapegoat, and she pleaded. No, my son didn't do this, my son didn't, and he gave her the interview, and the interview is incredible if you can get your hands on George. I managed, over a period of 2 years, I managed to buy every magazine, and I haven't, some of them very pricey, $75, $100, and I haven't been able to review them all, but I did read that particular article, and man, I mean, he hammers down. John knows how to write, and he let him have it. So we had several people who really needed him out of the way. There is no question that he was headed for a political future. No question. So Who was he going to take out? Who was going to get in his way? Whose way was he going to get in front of? And who stood to benefit? Who stood to benefit? I'd like to open you up to questions now and discussion. Any way you want to go with it. Can we set up a mic for him?
Can you stop speaking?
Sure.
Thank you.
Which memo? The last one, the FBI thing on
Yes.
Biden?
Yes.
Let's go
The
back.
memo you had with the number of things, that's not going to come out till
Oh, the
2029.
FBI report?
Yes, when did that come out? And,
I'm not sure of the date on it. This was, if you go online, the Skolnick's website is still kept up very well. His son has taken it over. And the title of the article is America's Golden Boy. And that's when, and Sherman talks about, he said, within 48 hours, the public records were still accessible, and he grabbed this. He got the document in a nick of time. As soon as he had gotten the document, they shut down that access. They didn't let anybody else in.
so do you know when that was
I
from?
can't tell you exactly, no.
And when did you get it?
I got it in my research probably a couple of years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is it true that they did not send out teams to search for him, and that Clinton had to call and actually get the teams rolling? Is that true?
Want to have a discussion on that one? First of all, who in this room believes that Bill Clinton was not advised of the disappearance of John Kennedy Jr. until 5:30 in the morning? Is that believable to anybody? And this is why I'm taking it here, because this is hearsay, okay? This isn't evidence. This is evidence. You know, the weather is evidence. That's solid. But is that believable? Yes, sir. Well,
Well, I actually heard Ted Kennedy call Clinton and told him please help me, and because he loved Kennedy, he does. But so, did he know about the report? Impossible. But Ted Kennedy actually said that in an interview, so I can.
the other problem I have with it, well, first of all, he didn't know it went to the Pentagon the night before. He didn't know that the Air Force was brought in to search for him. Does that make any sense?
What I had heard was that it took him to personally get involved with saying that they want that to get the things rolling many hours later.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay?
Not that he
And
didn't
I think
know.
everybody else does.
Okay.
I'm just asking if it's believable. Is it believable that no one told the president?
I'm asking a different question.
Perhaps I'm misunderstanding.
I'm asking a different question. I'm asking,
Do you
did
mind
it,
if I sit down, do you?
did it take multiple hours to get help out there looking for him? And I heard
It
originally.
took 4 hours just to get the Coast Guard out on the
Right.
original search, okay?
Right.
And then they monkey around
And they were looking in the wrong place.
deliberately over at Horton
Okay.
Point
So
for
that's-
the next 15 hours.
So that's true.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
The distraction of this whole delay in the wrong spot was, of course, because of the Senate run against Hillary Clinton, who probably designed this whole crash. The magazine George, which was a big middle finger to George Bush, and JFK Jr. was certainly going to run for the Senate and the presidential, and who got in the way was little Miss Hillary Clinton. Now, we all know that. And that's probably who planted the
Well, I didn't want to
explosive
plant
device.
this in your mind.
Yeah.
I want to see.
Yeah,
what
it's
you-
fairly obvious. We know the plane was sabotaged, first of all. That's a slam dunk. And thank you for your outburst. That was very much warranted before.
No, it wasn't, and I was out of line. Because
So we know that's a
something
slam.
like that
That's a slam
damages-
dunk. First of all, we know
damages the whole
the
organization.
plane was obviously sabotage. We already know that part. The question is who stand to benefit. We know that. Who wanted him out of the way? We know that. So the rest is a very good presentation, but that's the information we need to get out to the public. The fact that this man, the sister, the wife, and the unborn child were murdered That's the disgusting part about this whole thing, and was covered up by the highest points of our government. Thank you.
Sure.
Now Jack Cashel is one of the premier experts and authors on the Flight 800 shoot down and
That's
the
what I saw
government's
it before.
response
Yeah,
to that.
I've done a lot of research.
I wondered whether you'd ever considered taking your information and contacting him and collaborating with him to as sort of a peer review to exchange ideas and challenge each other to see whether there was any connection between the those two incidents, because they were both reported as just fuel tanks and accidents, and Flight 800 was actually a Stinger missile that was out of the bay, and he's worked extensively on that for the last 20 years.
In answer to your question, I did not contact Jack Cashel. I contacted a gentleman by the name of Hank Hughes. Hank Hughes was the lead investigator for the NTSB with TWA Flight 100. Okay, Hank Hughes, the lead investigator from TWA, and about 6 top-notch guys, I mean the very top of the investigators, all got together once they retired and decided they were going to bring the hammer to this, okay, because, and this is too, I'd like to get back with the Clintons and the Bushes in a minute. But that incident was so jaded, was so clouded, and there was so much corruption. So let's go to the physics first, okay? And then I'll tell you what Hank Hughes told me. And I speak with him maybe once every 2 or 3 months. The evidence is that this airplane fully loaded with people, with 2 fuel tanks completely full, because they're going overseas, 2 fuel tanks completely full of kerosene, with absolutely no airspace in those fuel tanks, just blew up because some little wire scratched up against something else that was not even in the tank. Okay, first of all. Secondly, and this is one of the investigators states this, I would urge all of you, especially you, sir. There's a documentary on this on Amazon, and it might cost you $5 to watch it, but it was the #1 documentary for 2 years on Amazon. It's TWA Flight 800, and it's all about the plight of the investigators, the corruption that was involved, the manipulation by National Transportation Safety Board, the manipulation by the FBI, the alteration of evidence. The alteration of evidence. They caught inspectors coming in there at night. They weren't really, these were appointees, top-level guys. They caught them in there at night, rearranging the parts of the aircraft so that they could fit it to the official story. So let's go to ignition, first of all, okay? The only wire that was in close proximal location to that tank was a very, very light voltage wire, like microamps. And it was not capable of even producing a spark to set off a bang. Okay, and what really took the airplane down were proximity missiles. Okay, the proximity missiles came up from the sea. It was seen by over 700 people. 700 people got suppressed in that investigation. These missiles go up, then they come within 6 or 8 feet of the aircraft, and that's where they blow. The missile doesn't go into the airplane, it's the shock wave that knocks the airplane apart. Okay, and that kind of a blast will blow the fuel tank open, vaporize the fuel, now you're gonna fire. Now you have a fire. And that's how that happened. Hughes was outraged at what had happened. Let me tell you, up until the Bush administration, National Transportation had a protocol, and much of this is still intact right now. Normally what they do when they come up with an investigation like this, they have their own airplane down at their facility. They call all the guys in the night, get on the plane, we're sending you out to the wreck. All these guys go out, and they're all specialties. You got the fuel guy specialty, you got fuselage specialty. Everybody's got something particular that he goes and looks at. They stay there for days and days and days and compile what are called field notes. Okay, and the field notes usually accumulate 400 or 500 pages, depending on the severity of the accident. His team went in. They did phenomenal amounts of work. I'm sorry, let's go to the original protocol, okay? So they would go in, they accumulate all this data, and then they would all sequester into a room and condense this into the final report. When the Bush administration came in, and this is quote from Hank Hughes, and he gave me permission to say it, so I'm not worried about it. He said, when the Bush administration came in, all of a sudden the administration all got shifted. And very competent, intelligent, and loyal people who had been working there for years and years got bumped out, and suddenly political appointees were put into positions. And they had their chief there, the chief had 35 or 40 years experience. He was well respected by the officers. It was unprecedented. They got rid of them and they replaced this guy with some, and I'm not being a sexist here, some 27-year-old woman who had absolutely no experience in the field. Okay, and then they sent in another, I wish I could think of this guy, David Lamb, I think was the little weasel. They sent this guy in, and he's the one that they caught in the hangar at night rearranging everything. Okay, and he's also, he's the one that testifies before a Senate subcommittee when they reinvested the accident. Could someone find me a little water, Victoria? Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm hoarse. I got a little bit of a virus. Where did I go? So all of a sudden now, there's a policy change. And the field investigators no longer sequester and come out with the final report. They take the field notes. The field notes go to the administration. Thank you. Thank you. Well, no, I'm on topic. Now the data is taken up to these incompetent higher-ups. They compile the final report. Hank has a 600-page report on TWA Flight 100. 600-page report. They handed him back 38 pages that didn't resemble anything close to what he submitted. These people were outraged, and they filed a 10,000-name petition to the NTSB to reopen the investigation of TWA Flight 800. Congress denied it. Not Congress, but the committee denied. No, it was NTSB. Yeah, NTSB stood up there. I believe the guy's name was Armstrong. He says, nah, this is shut and close deal. It's all done. See you later. No hearing. This was supposed to be a public hearing. They didn't let the public in. I would present to you that after TWA Flight 800, JFK Jr. was a drop in a bucket. Drop in a bucket. They got away with 275 people on that airplane. It was nothing. It was nothing to cover up this. It was easy. Only two years later. And you had all the same corrupt people in. Yeah. You, sir.
I haven't had a chance to read The Inheritance yet, but I was wondering if you could just give us kind of a timeline of the watch, like when it was in so-and-so's custody, and then then when the next person had it. Do you know of sort of a timeline?
It's really not my level of expertise. I don't want to speculate and tell you something wrong. I would rather go back and discuss the Bush and Clinton relationship and see what we can do about tying them into this whole deal. Yeah. Somebody else could do it better than I could. So, yeah.
Who or why was TW 800 brought down?
I can't speculate. I'm not the guy to ask. No. And honestly, I don't have any idea I'm not holding something from you.
Are you aware of the potential that it was an accidental?
I think that's
US
certainly a
Navy missile
possibility.
test that
I think it's a
went after the missiles went to the
possibility
wrong
a
target.
military exercise went awry. I think it's a possibility. I think it may have been an accident. And since that was election year, some order came out and said, well, it was an accident, make it look like one. You know, and Kellstrom, who was the he was the district chief for New York FBI, Kellstrom came on television and repeatedly that it was not a missile, it was not a missile, it was not a missile. Okay, and cover. It was not a missile. They got so upset with this, the CIA did. CIA got so upset with this that they produced their own video of TWA Flight 800, and the title of the video is, "It Was Not a Missile." They don't tell you what it was, they tell you what it wasn't. It was not a missile. And it's great, and it's in, it's in the video that I told you to get, TWA Flight 800, right? And it shows the airplane breaks in half, starts climbing, then dives into the sea. It's hysterical. It's hysterical. And there isn't any investigator that was on that crash that would agree with that. No one. Yes, ma'am.
I didn't quite get your take on the missing passenger seat. Do you think there was somebody there who was removed?
I do not believe so. I just think that.
Do you think they entered a plane that had a missing passenger seat?
I'm sorry?
You think that the passengers, the Kennedys, entered a plane that had a missing passenger seat when they got into it?
No. I think the seat was probably there. It just may have been lost in the crash. You know, it's just that simple. Sometimes they don't recover every single piece. You know, you're talking about open ocean, and if you try to search out a debris field in the open ocean, and I've done a certain degree of this, you'll find, you know, you'll find a central mass and then a periphery of stuff. And I think it's just possible it got overlooked. That's my take.
But wouldn't there be evidence of torn metal or something if it hadn't actually been removed?
Well, it was dislodged from the mount, no doubt. No doubt. But they don't mention it. It's nowhere in the NTSB report, so I can't.
No, but I've read. I don't remember the details. That's why I was asking that there is evidence that it was actually removed, physically removed. You know, with tools.
I haven't found that.
Okay.
I can't substantiate that. Yes, sir.
I was wondering, the barricade for the helicopter, do you know where that was located and how the picture...
You mean the barricade for the remains?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, that was at Otis.
And like, how was the picture obtained, the photo?
I pulled it off a website. I can't tell you what it was off the bat. I should have cited a source, but I'm not sure where it was. But they said this is a picture of it. I can't 100% sure say that's it, but
right.
I'm pretty sure.
Okay, thanks.
Brian.
Yeah, the missing seat and his lack of a co-pilot. What are your thoughts on the fact that in no circumstances you would normally have flown with an instructor, and that the reason for the delay of takeoff was to wait for an instructor, for which there was then no seat?
Well, the first thing that they talk about is the fact that he had an excessive amount of time on the phone, and then they speculate. This is the part where I diverse from John Hankey's work, which is Dark Legacy 2. I'll tell you why the Manchurian flight instructor just doesn't stick. First of all, the evidence. The conditions did not warrant it. He did not need the flight instructor.
Right.
He knew how to fly his airplane. He had the visibility. He had a beautiful VFR night. He had a beautiful VFR night, and he was just going to relax. Mm-hmm. He was going to relax. One of the arguments about the Manchurian candidate, and it's a very attractive subject, you know, to get into because it's romantic. And about the only evidence that I've seen that they put forward to try to support that theory is that, and we touched on this earlier, the fuel selector valve was caught in the off position. Okay, that's the way they found it. Now, Now, that same fuel selector valve had a détente lock on it. So you would have to pull or push on it to move it to that position, okay? John didn't do it, okay? And we know the engine was going full bore when it in, okay? That fuel was still flying out of the fuel tanks and supplying that engine. Okay, so it was either the impact that drove that valve over, or it was an alteration of evidence.
Okay, and what you said earlier actually
Which is very easy, you know what I mean? If somebody wants to pick it up, click.
And what you said earlier supports that, because the Manchurian candidate flight instructor would also have had to stand on the seat to push the controls forward, so he couldn't have done it anyway.
No, and if you were John, what would you do?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
And frankly, believe it or not, this happens even in flight instructor. My flight instructor, Frankie Sutton, the one I told you about, she was with this guy who panicked and muscled the controls away from her. Muscle the controls. She didn't know what the hell he was going to do. Bam! She just let him have a side shot right to the nose. That was the end of it. That was the end of it. John wouldn't have sat there and stood for that. Randy.
Hey, you had mentioned that one of the criticisms was that the number of hours that he had accumulated, I believe 450 combined, that some of the criticism is that people say it was over too large a period of time.
No, absolutely not, Randy. And we proved that in the earlier. We'll back up to that.
No, my question is, what is a reasonable amount of time for that as a flight instructor?
Oh, he only had a few hours in there in the beginning when his mother said, John, you just can't be doing this, and he quit, okay? And that was, maybe he had 40 hours. Let's just speculate. Maybe he had 40 hours, all right? But up to that point, he had also been flying ultralights and other such stuff around, so he had other flying experience. After that, he did a really nice consolidated program over a period of 2 years with transitions from one airplane to another, good, consistent teaching methods that, building block methods. And these teaching methods are developed by aircraft companies like Cessna and everything else. You can get a pilot's license two ways. You can go by an unapproved route or the approved route. And if you go the unapproved route, it usually costs you another 5 or 10 hours to do it. If you go with integrated instruction, it's one of these deals where you get a booklet you review, and then you do a tape on something else, and then you know what I mean? It's more involved. However, if you're a smart guy and you can read a book and you study, and this is where a lot of people fail, they don't really get into the detail. The highest incidence of aircraft accidents is amongst doctors and lawyers. First of all, they can afford this stuff.
Let me get back on camera.
Sure. First, they can afford to do it. Secondly, they're busy, so they don't. I can't tell you how many pilots I have flown with who play with radios all day and do not have a clue. Radios and nav equipment, automatic nav equipment, don't have a clue how to fly the mechanical machine. Don't have a clue.
How many hours are required for a pilot to make the transition to become an instructor?
Instructor, just going on my own experience, you have to be private. You have to have a commercial rating. You have to have an instrument rating, and then you get your instructor rating. And quite frankly, after you get the instrument rating, the commercial is my commercial rating took me 0.3 of an hour around the patch, and I got the commercial. The flight instructor rating is more an acclimation to the right seat and controlling from the opposite side, because the student's going to be in the pilot seat on the left. So the instructor part is acclimation to the right seat and teaching methods. You got books as to how to teach, and it was very simple. And I don't think I don't think I put 15 hours into it.
Yeah, I think it's about 300 hours. The point
Right.
being that...
And even as I told you, the insurance requirements, and this is another big alarm, the insurance requirements to transition into complex aircraft are 10.5 hours. 10.5 hours is all you need to fly a complex. Complex being retractable gear, controllable propeller. There's just one more knob here and one more switch here. That's all you have to learn.
He actually had accumulated a great many hours compared to most
He's way
private
beyond.
pilots. He was
He's
very well
way
trained.
beyond the minimum requirements. And that's why, unfortunately, I lost my fuse earlier, you know, because a man came in here and he made statements that he was ignorant about, and I lost it. I apologize one more time. Go ahead.
There's the flight path and the radar clearly indicates what happened, and that dead man spiral did not happen. However, I just wanted to mention, and I'm not sure if you're aware of it or not, you can actually get the experience of a dead man's spiral at Oshkosh, Wisconsin, at the EAA. And they actually do a demonstration of it for you, and if you're a pilot, you get credit for it.
Let me accent what you're saying right here. Part of every pilot's training, and this was a lot of fun, especially if you're a puker.
Are you a puker?
Well, I couldn't go up in an elevator without getting airsick. This is no word of a lie. And it was a real problem because here I'm with this beautiful woman that, you know, half of me wants me to have her as my girlfriend and the other half wants her as a mother. You know, and I go flying with her and there I am barfing all over the...
Yeah, unimpressive.
I'm sorry, this is so gross, but this is the reality of it, you know. So I was burdened with this, and I said, how the hell am I ever going to get past this point? And this particular part of the training is really what induces this. They stick a hood on you, and the hood is very confining. It goes over the top of your head, and it has a tunnel, and you have to stick it down over your face. The instructor puts the airplane into what's called a critical attitude, which would be nose high with bank or nose low with bank. Okay, once the spiral is initiated, the instructor says, okay, lift your head, recover. And there's a procedure for both of them. And it's, you know, in one, it's in the nose high attitude, drop the nose, level the wings. Okay, because the first thing you want to do is stop the stall. And the second thing you want to do is level the wings. If it's nose low, level the wings, pull up the straight attitude. Okay, because you want your vertical component of lift going straight up. You don't want to go in this way, right? And we get hours and hours of that. And I want to say, hood time for the private pilot, you get at least 7 hours of that. And I know John had to be trained. I mean, this is required. When you go for your flight test, it is not up to the examiner to decide what he's going to throw at you to see what you know how to do. All right, he has a checklist. And if you bust on any one of the things that he asks you to do, you're done. He busts you, you have to go through training again, and then you get a second shot at it. And I busted the first time. And my friend was the flight examiner. He says, I'm sorry, I got to hammer you. And I forget what the hell it was that I did, but I think it was the recovery from a nose-high attitude, and he didn't like the rudder that I stuck in to make the recovery. And then I've got to get into, you know, control surfaces and other such things. But he says, I'm doing this to teach your instructor a lesson. I'm not doing this to give it to you. And the instructor was the tall blonde I love so much, who he taught to fly. He's teaching her a lesson. Your student was deficient. So that particular critical attitude is absolutely required, and John had more than enough time to recognize a spiral. Also, a spiral is a coordinated maneuver. You are not in a stall. Okay, in fact, we learned steep spirals as an emergency procedure. If you have an engine failure, let's say you're at 3,000 feet, you have a field down here you want to make. You pinpoint that field, you roll a 60-degree bank, which is fairly steep. You trim the airplane. Once the airplane's trimmed, hands and feet off. The airplane will stay right there and go around, and you can hold it there with rudder. You're experiencing 2.5 Gs at the time, so it feels like everything's pulling you down. But you'll make this very nice coordinated turn that'll bleed off altitude, and when you arrive at 1,000 feet above ground level, you roll the airplane back out level and you make your field. And that's how it's done. And the safe pilots always make a high approach, because you can always make the field if you have to lose altitude. You can't do it if you're way out there and you're too low, you lose your engine, you're going in.
I wanted to describe an exercise at Oshkosh, which becomes the busiest airport in the world at the EAA. John used to come there.
Oh yeah, I've been to Oxford.
It's a pretty famous place for pilots to go to. The demonstration was they put you in a chair that was on a rotating turntable, and they put the hood on that you described.
Yeah.
And they put a stick in between your legs, and they told you, once they started this going, and they told you to put the stick to the side that you're going to. And so you'd go to the right, now to the left.
Well, this
now
is
to the
it.
right.
You know, they have lift simulators.
But the idea was that then they told you to look down and look up. And I'll tell you, if I hadn't been strapped into the chair, I would have fallen flat on my face on the floor. And
Well, the only thing that those simulators can't do for you is simulate the G-force.
right, but what I'm saying is what it boils down to is that the inner ear hair follicles stand up, so your brain can't tell anymore. In a gradual turn, your brain can't tell anymore what your orientation is, and so you get completely disoriented.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about it is, after you got done with the test, I asked him, how many times did we change direction? I thought, well, 3 or 4 or 5 times. Didn't change direction at all. The only thing they changed was the speed. It was quite astonishing. If anybody ever has an opportunity to do it, it's an amazing experience in regard to inner ear.
Make sure you're not a puker.
And make sure you're not a puker.
I found a
and
trick
you're not with a
that was
great-looking
really
woman.
neat, and this I used it in my own training, and it worked really, really well with my students. You peel an orange under the hood.
I know we're
The orange under the hood, and it goes away. Go ahead, Pete.
I know we're just about out of time, and this is not on topic, so it'll be brief. Do you have an opinion on Malaysian Airlines, free scale, and remote control of the... No.
No, I know nothing about it.
Okay, thank you.
What's left, Don? All right, let's go. Who wants to talk about the Clintons and the Bushes? Okay. How many people here think the Clintons and the Bushes were political opponents? Okay, good. Oh, 1, 2. Oh, cancel. Good. The Clintons and the Bushes have been a criminal crime enterprise that have been operating for years and years and years. Okay, and they've been running drugs and guns back and forth across the borders. I didn't hear that. Can you? Lorian, what'd she say? Oh, if you need the inheritance. Yeah, grab it. Okay, where were we? Oh, Clintons and the Bushes. Right. You're talking about the Clantons here. Okay, they've been doing this stuff for the longest time, back and forth across the border. 5 minutes yet? 1 minute? I can't go much further, but John accumulated a file that seriously implicated George H.W. Okay, he had a file, and his quote to the gentleman who gave him this file was, and I quote, he says, "Thank you very much for bringing this to me. I've already spent 6 figures on investigators and attorneys, and if George W. even thinks he's going to run for dog catcher, he's got something coming." Okay, and John's position in New York to run for the Senate seat, to run for the governorship, and ultimately the president, stood directly in the way of a couple who moved up there from Arkansas. So, some thoughts for motive. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Damon Ise.